There is more to Arnold Schwarzenegger than just legend. He is a living example of it is possible to achieve greatness through suffering, self-control, and an unwavering vision.
He was born into pain and darkness rather than privilege.
Nevertheless, he rose like a storm, turning his will into steel, his body into discipline, and his fate into history. From Mr. Olympia's international stages to the corridors of power, ranging from the Terminator's unrelenting rage to the composed poise of a statesman, Arnold has endured the burden of the world and never let it drop once. He did more than simply alter the rules. He revised the meaning of strength, bravery, and the ability to disregard all those who have said, "You can't."
He remained steadfast for decades as a representation of command, accuracy, and fortitude in the expression of suffering.
And now, possessing a personal wealth of more than $1.20 billion, the harsh irony of fame rising to heights that the rest of the world can only admire is this. No wealth or glory can stop the approaching silent storm, because even the greatest heroes make mistakes from time to time. Additionally, as the curtain of a cruel storm is approaching, an age is getting heavier. One that cannot be highlighted, and no muscle can resist. Arnold, who is 78 years old, is no longer fighting for titles or cheers. He is going through a phase that is more difficult than any role he's played before. Remember to hit like before we start as a sign of courage and reverence for this remarkable legend.
However, storms are not brand new to Schwarzenegger.
Prior to the cameras, the titles, and the billion-dollar fortunately, a boy was present. A youngster who was familiar with the sensation of cold floors, the sound of quiet, and the burden of being invisible. On July 30, 1947, I was born in the tiny Arnold entered a world still characterized by shadows in the Austrian village of Thal. Of conflict. Even though Austria was rebuilding, the wounds were still visible in its streets, in its homes, as well as in its citizens' hearts. His family occupied a small home. Without contemporary conveniences, where warmth was something that had to be earned rather than given, and winters were harsh. Gustav, his father, a police officer with a tough upbringing, he governed the home with strict rules.
Praise and affection were scarce. Even more uncommon.
Later on, Arnold would remember that he was afraid of punishment, due to invisibleness, the silent pain of being ignored in his own house. The golden child was Minhard, his older brother, who appeared to have no trouble controlling their father's blessing. In contrast, Arnold was the reserved one, cautious, resolute, but rarely observed. This disparity gave him a strong desire to establish his value.
I was aware years later, he would say, love wasn't given out in our home. You needed to earn it, and even then, you might not understand.
This insight strengthened his determination. He made the decision to raise himself if no one else would. Literally.
The issue was that Thal lacked a gym with gleaming equipment, no mentor to help him.
What he had were bits of wood, scraps of metal, an Achilles cellar with a rusty and earthy smell. In that dark room, illuminated by a single bulb, Arnold started to mold more than muscle.
With each homemade weight, his silent declaration was lifted. I'm present. I am important. The metallic clang became his solution to the upstairs silence.
As other boys spent their summer afternoons playing outside or relaxing, Arnold was underground, imagining a life far away while his perspiration trickled onto the concrete beyond his village's boundaries. He taped magazines to the walls of his bedroom. Cutouts of titans and bodybuilders who, in his opinion, were not only powerful but also free. Free from being invisible, from shame, and from smallness. He observed their positions as though they were sacred writings, learning the human form's contours and lines, not out of conceit, but to get away. Later on, he would realize that strength was not about appearing strong, the goal was to live. To survive during those times, one had to construct a body and a will so strong that nothing, not loneliness, not poverty, not he might be held back by doubt. By the late 1950s, when he was in his early teens, Arnold's world started to expand.
In Graz, a few miles away, he found a tiny gym and would spend hours riding a bike to train there. The trip was exhausting. Going uphill travels in a savage wind and gets home late at night.
However, he enjoyed the challenge. He was one step away from the life he didn't want with every pedal stroke, and a more step towards the life he had dreamed of. His friends believed he had an obsession. They were correct. Arnold had no hobby in mind. Freedom was what he was after. Later on interviews, he would talk about that period clearly and without resentment. He said, "I never saw a future in that village.
I had to make one."
Consequently, in On the Roads Leading to Graz, and in the furnace of a chilly Austrian cellar, a champion was created. Not by cheers, not by consolation, but by the silent rebellion of a youngster who wouldn't remain small. Those formative years, challenging and relentless, provided him with more than just muscle. They provided him with the guidance, the vision, and the unwavering conviction that he could overcome any challenge. Arnold Schwarzenegger was creating the one thing that would define him long before the world knew his name. Him indefinitely. The ability to get back up repeatedly, regardless of how heavy the weight. When Arnold Schwarzenegger, then just 21 years old, got off the plane in 1968, America was not the land of opportunity he had dreamed of when he was a young man. It was a battleground he would have to traverse by himself. He brought a suitcase full of clothes, a few bucks, and a dream that was too big for the thin wallet he carried in his pocket. His accent from Austria wrapped around each word like chains, transforming casual discussions into tiresome marathons. When he spoke, people smiled courteously, but many people just didn't understand him or the words were unfamiliar to me, Arnold would recollect.
So I used my actions to communicate.
Work was implied by those actions.
Hard, bone-deep, unglamorous work.
During the day, he swung hammers and carried bricks on muscles burning on construction sites in the California sun. He saved every dollar. At night, he worked out in small, poorly lit gyms that had an iron and ambition, shaping a figure he was positive the world would not be able to ignore. He rented modest shared rooms with only a bed, a light that flickered, and a hook to hang his dream. On some nights, he would lie awake and listen while gazing at a cracked ceiling. The din of traffic in Los Angeles, and question whether he had made the biggest error of his life. During those years in America, bodybuilding remained a specialized craze, far from the renowned it would later become a sport. Outside of a small group of followers, the majority perceived it as an odd sideshow. Arnold was just another overly muscular foreigner in their eyes, pursuing an impossibly unrealistic dream. He was aware that there was just one way to alter their thoughts. Win and win until they were unable to ignore him anymore. In 1970, at the age of 23, he became the youngest Mr. Olympia winner ever. However, each title came with under oppressive pressure. "I wasn't just losing a trophy if I lost," he said. "I was losing my position in this nation." Each competition was a struggle for existence, for the sake of identity and the right to remain. The physical distance was less acute than the loneliness. Stress. He missed his mother's home in Thal, Austria, which was thousands of miles away. Cooking, his hometown's well-known hills, and even his harsh-voiced dad. However, there were no family members to share the burden with or arms to fall into. Wait. America was fast, loud, and uncompromising. He was closest to men who understood the language of pain in the gym. And advancement. But the silence returned when the lights went out and the weights ceased clanging. His body as well demanded a cost. He pushed past boundaries in his unrelenting quest to get stronger. Until they retaliated. Deep bruises, sore joints, and torn muscles. They were not honorifics, but cautions. But he persisted. His pain became his money. Traded every day for a chance at the future he dreamed of. He encircled his knees, applied ice to his elbows, and continued to lift. The Austrian bridge had burned. There was no turning back once he was gone. He held on to it all. A single vision. One day, no one would be able to ignore him, and his name would be ingrained in the culture of bodybuilding as well as its history. Every drop of perspiration, every penny saved, and each lonely night was a brick, and he was erecting a monument to himself. Decades later, he reflected, saying, "I saw myself not where I was but where I wanted to be." That unwavering vision, and a stranger in a foreign land, became a man because of the suffering he endured as its cost. One day, everyone would know. When the 1970s rolled around, Arnold Schwarzenegger was no longer the stranger dozing off in a small space. He represented the face of athletics. He won his first Mr. Olympia title in 1970 at the age of 23, and by 1975 he had previously occupied the top spot on the podium 6 times. The 7th would enter. 1980 solidified his status as a legendary figure. However, there was a reality behind the glittering trophies not many could see. Every victory resulted in a greater burden rather than relief. The under pressure to keep one's body sculpted to almost legendary proportions required training through discomfort, concealing wounds, and living on the precipice of success and failure. Aching and torn tendons joints, and he was plagued by the persistent worry that one mistake could ruin everything. Like dark spots in the spotlight. He would say, "Winning makes you a target," say a few years later. Everyone is watching, anticipating the moment you make a mistake. Hollywood came calling shortly after. Additionally, Conan the Barbarian changed him from a sportsman in 1982. Icon to a budding film star. But it was still an uphill climb. Studio executives remarked that his name was too long and foreign, and they laughed at his thick accent, for a marquee, too impossible. There were few roles and constant rejection. However, forged in the crucible of bodybuilding, Arnold resisted giving up. He worked on his delivery, studied acting, and when The Terminator came out in 1984, the same accent that theaters once made fun of became a defining characteristic of film. His words, "I'll be back," reverberated globally. However, notoriety has its own cost. The timetables were brutal. Months spent away from home on location, from anything familiar, from family. There were quiet places in his life because of the distance that could not be filled by applause. He was well known, powerful, and wealthy. More than he could have imagined. But on some nights when he was by himself in hotel rooms, he felt the same quiet he had experienced in Los Angeles as a young man. And notoriety made every stumble more loudly. An underwhelming film, a lost competition, even a mistake made by oneself. He was more than just Arnold, so each one was magnified. He was Schwarzenegger, Arnold. He had a throne thanks to his success, but it made him an expectation prisoner as well. His shortcomings could just as easily be revealed by the same spotlight that illuminated his path. Then came the changes that would put him to the test in ways that neither cameras nor iron had ever done. Taking a break from competition to abandon the assurance of a film and concentrate only on acting, fame to venture into the volatile world of politics in the early 2000s. Every action attracted detractors who questioned his intentions, skills, and authority to even make an effort. Every decision he made ran the risk of destroying the reputation he had spent decades in the making. However, he accepted the risk because he knew that inaction was a more subdued form of death. He once remarked that if you don't keep going, you start going backwards. From the outside, everything was glorious. The 7 crowns of Olympia, the governorship wins, the box office wins. However, those who paid more attention could see the reality. The nights are long, the air is thin, and the man at the top is still isolated in a lot of ways. He had used iron to construct his empire. Discipline as well as a strong enough will to overcome any obstacle. For many years, Arnold Schwarzenegger's body served as his stronghold, impervious to the lights of Mr. Olympia, unwavering in the face of Hollywood's brutal schedules, and unbreakable political theater. It had transported him to history books on different continents and amidst tempests that would have engulfed lesser men. However, in 1997, that fortress crumbled at 50. Above him, fluorescent lights blazed. His lungs were filled with the cold, sterile bite of antiseptic. In the distance, somewhere, a rhythm that was no longer wholly his own pulsed out from the heart monitor. Regarding that in a Los Angeles hospital bed, he wasn't the Terminator or the future governor. Not the former Mr. Olympia, whose body served as a living reminder of human will. He was a man about to be cut by surgeons, stripped to his most vulnerable truth. Into his chest to replace an aortic valve that had been concealed for 50 years since he was born. It wasn't pride that had prevented him from speaking. Fear was the cause. Fear of what the world might witness over the course of his lifetime. He had outrun even the strongest man in the room. Show vulnerability. Back in Austria, he kept it from his mother. She was getting older. He refused to put any more weight on her, even though his hands had already been touched by time. Shoulders. He promised himself, when it's over, I'll give her a call. However, in 1999, she disappeared. No goodbye, no call. When the news broke, he was on set, and the cameras rolling, with muscles honed from fighting gravity for decades. Inside the sun, the scar on his chest would disappear as he broke into pieces. The wound on the heart would never stop beating. Thus, he carried out his usual action. He continued to move. There were movie premieres in the 2000s where flashbulbs exploded like political rallies where the audience yelled his name, artillery, speeches that reverberated in opulent halls. The world still saw the machine as perfect. However, his heart would whisper in the silence when the doors closed and the lights went out. He was aware that it would come back. It did in March 2018, when it was 70 years old. What ought to have been unexpectedly, a routine catheter valve replacement turned into an urgent open heart procedure. When he woke up, the surgeons informed him that we had made a mistake. He was restrained, confused, and the tube in his throat prevented him from speaking. For a man who had spent his whole life been constructed using control, it was a personal hell. Thought cut flashes like lightning through the fog. His kids. Will they recall me as Maria? Will they remember this, or will it be strong? Is she still concerned? The media, what are they going to write? And his mother's picture is always gone without a farewell, causing him to worry that he might abandon his own kids with the identical wound. Surgery, October 2020, 72 number 3. By then, there was no negotiating and he stopped asking, why me, left, just a nod to the doctors, no denial. An implicit recognition that the best defense against time was resistance. Then March 2024 arrived. Even at 76, he continues to lift weights, smile for the camera, and addressing audiences that eagerly awaited his every word. However, the rhythm deep within that had kept him going in every conflict started to falter. Arrhythmia. Scar tissue, the doctor said. His heart's electrical signals were being jumbled by decades of surgeries. The pacemaker is the answer. A lifeline for the majority. Arnold perceived it as a decision. The man who once crushed records, bent steel with his bare hands, and stood by himself at the top of due to a device that instructed his heart when to beat, two worlds would now survive. I used to be the machine. Now I need one inside me. Days said, almost to himself, as he glanced at the doctor later. He went public via Arnold's Pump Club, his podcast. On the surface, the goal was to educate people about the fact that even giants can fall. However, those who paid close attention could hear a sound more profound than words. The weariness of a combatant who has endured too many wounds to recall, and the silent submission that results from fought every battle and is aware that there are still more to come. After surgery, less than a week later, he stood at a summit on the environment. Like 1,000 tiny suns, lights flashed, applause roared like waves in the distance. He smiled, the same smile that had charmed for decades, millions. However, underneath the fitted suit was a new collection of stitches, a pacemaker concealed in plain sight, and a man who now measured each handshake, each dawn, each utterance in opposition to the constant ticking in his chest. He had dedicated his life to demonstrating his strength against suffering, uncertainty, more resilient than failure itself. Now, his first action every morning was to put his hand against his chest. Not to gauge a muscle's hardness, but to sense that he was kept here by a silent mechanical pulse. Not because he was victorious death, but because he had at last mastered the ability to hear it. This is the latest Arnold. Not the indestructible symbol. Not the machine that can't be defeated. Only a man with wounds. A few were etched into the flesh. Others are buried out of sight. However, advancing. Even so, the silence is only a step away. Sometimes a surgeon's scalpel isn't the source of the most intense pain, the fear of a failing pulse. It originates from the quiet, gradual theft of a loved one's thoughts. From witnessing the passing of the person you once knew while you can still see their body. The world called Arnold Schwarzenegger an iron and willpower-carved titan of strength, a man who had lifted himself from chilly gym floors to the most powerful podiums. However, there was no amount of weight could stop him from seeing his father's eyes and knowing that the man he loved was gone already. In the early 2000s, years prior, Sergeant Shriver, the proud American diplomat, Eunice Kennedy's spouse, and a co-founder of the Peace Corps Shriver, and the man who had shaped Arnold's moral compass and political dreams started showing small cracks in the armor. Initially, they were nearly innocuous, misplaced keys. A recurring narrated as though it were brand new. The middle of a sentence was interrupted by a name. Arnold took note, and his chest seen these signs before, so it tightened. An Austrian uncle who had similarly deteriorated into dementia. He was aware that it would get worse, more severe than any physical harm he had ever experienced. Years passed as the months went by. The erosion quickened. The man who had previously addressed presidents and stood in front of nations, and motivated millions of people, was now a frail person pacing rooms like he in his own life, a ghost. Then the day arrived that would leave a mark on Arnold's memory for all time.
The visit was quiet in the afternoon.
Soft light from the sun fell across the space. Arnold leant closer to talk, anticipating a grin, a flash of acknowledgement.
Instead, Sargent gave him a look that was at once neither perplexed nor irritated, just empty.
He questioned, "Who are you?" tumbling under the burden of 1,000 heartaches. Arnold's throat shut. He didn't respond. He was unable to do so because his father, the man who had taught him how to tie a tie, how to talk politely, and how to have faith that public service, which was once a noble vocation, is no longer alive. Additionally, there is no sorrow more intense or injury more acrid than grieving for someone who is still living. In his rare moments of vulnerability, Arnold would later acknowledge that this went deeper than heartbreak, deeper than any of his surgeries, and even deeper than his most public failures, as it made him confront a reality that had long plagued him. Following the funeral.
What if I also lose my identity one day? Observing Sergeant fade was more than just mental suffering. The mirror had been unkind.
Each misplaced word in Arnold's mind, every wasted second and every vacant stare turned into a whisper that money, medals, or muscle could not protect him from the slow, ruthless memory loss. He was plagued by it in hotel rooms following speeches, in the before anyone knew he was awake, there was quiet in the stillness of dawn in between shots. During interviews, he maintained his calmness, speaking the appropriate words, complimenting his father's legacy, and about optimism and pledging to raise awareness. However, behind closed doors, his fear turned into a discipline. He changed his diet, took supplements, and ate a lot of research, started daily mental exercises to help people remember rather than live longer. Because he was not afraid of death. It was the idea of still breathing, vanishing. As the illness continued to rob Sargent, Arnold's own image started to change. Time no longer seemed like a mountain to him. To subjugate, but as a negotiation partner, a rival you couldn't beat, only wait. His exercises started to focus more on building muscle than on sculpting bulk. Endurance. He shifted the focus of his speeches from ambition to legacy. Every word selected as though it were the final thing the world would remember him by. In 2011, when Sargent passed away, Arnold stood to give the eulogy at the podium. He was not the star of the film, not the figure that the cameras loved, but the former governor. He was a broken son, sad and terrified. The public moment was captured by the cameras, the measured phrases, the intensity of his voice, but they failed to convey the intimate moment. Later. As Arnold sat by himself in the rear of the hallway, gazing at the vacant tall and proud, he whispered something in the chair where his father had once sat, too low for anyone to hear, into the silence. It might have been a pledge. Perhaps it was a request that he resist the same silent thief's attempt to take him. That when the time for him arrived, before the world forgot his name, it would remember him. He had suffered the quiet suffering of observing the passing of a loved one into the past. However, nothing in that he might be prepared for the storm he would create for himself by his lengthy history of heartbreak. A tempest spawned not by fate but by his own decisions. This was no coincidence. It was Theon error that would destroy the reputation he had cultivated over the years, erode the confidence of those who most important, and leave a mark that could not be healed by time or victory. For decades, the crushing weight of an unspoken truth weighed heavily on Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was the father of a child with the family's longtime housekeeper, Mildred Bayana, who had been trusted in the most intimate moments of their everyday lives and a part of their home for more than 20 years. In 1997, Mildred gave birth to Arnold's son, Joseph. Almost simultaneously, Maria Shriver, Christopher, their youngest child, was born to his wife of over 10 years. Within weeks of one another, two boys were born. Sharing a home as children. One was publicly acknowledged, while the other was concealed and obvious. The secret resided inside their walls for more than 10 years, like a shadow that would not go home. The more Joseph grew, the Moretto Arnold became more difficult to overlook. The posture, the wide shoulders, there was a clear gleam in his eyes. Maria repeatedly observed the parallels, however. Trust and love made her see things her heart did not want to. She had been by Arnold's side during each reinvention, the unrelenting grind off bodybuilding, Hollywood scrutiny, the brutal struggles of politics, giving up her personal life and career to raise 4 kids under an harsh spotlight. He had fought every war with her. She was unaware that she was fighting a war, though. Furthermore, the enemy had already entered the gates. In 2011, the reality could not conceal any longer. Mildred was confronted by Maria, and the response her world was shattered by what she received. Without protest, Arnold admitted, the words that had been stuck in his chest for years began to tumble like stones, only the honest admission was made, no flimsy justifications or desperate lies were offered. Of an unforgivable betrayal. It was more than infidelity for Maria. It was a severe breach of confidence, a humiliation in public, and the understanding that she was mistaken about the life she had so vehemently defended. She moved out of their house quietly. Days later, the story was reported by the media, and the world went down. The headlines shouted. Every detail was examined by commentators, others made judgments. The true destruction, however, lay beneath the clamor. 4 kids, the news caught Patrick, Christopher, Christina, and Catherine off guard, and Joseph, a teenage boy, was abruptly thrown from the shadows into a storm of judgment that he had not requested. Arnold, now without authority, he did what little he could. He gave Joseph credit. Openly, provided assistance, and made an effort to establish a rapport. However, even as though the years of silence had already passed when the boy accepted his position and tied in Arnold's life, made their mark. Many were astounded by the grace with which Maria made her infrequent public statement. This is heartbreaking and painful, however, it's a fact of life. Those remarks reflected the subdued dignity of a woman who has been severely hurt but refuses to allow resentment to define her. Regarding Arnold, the embarrassment was oppressive. He did not consider this a scandal. It was the time that he was no longer the person his wife could rely on or the person his kids could complete faith. His empire had been founded on accuracy, charm, and discipline. Command. However, this era removed all of that, exposing a much more uncomfortable than failing. That even he was capable of destroying what he most treasured. The consequences went beyond one's reputation or career. It was spiritual, upending the basis of his self-concept. After several years, in an interview, he would state bluntly, "No one else is at fault. I'll bear the shame for the rest of my life because I caused this. I hurt the person I loved the most," and he meant it because, despite the speeches, the movies, the muscles, and despite the praise, a man could never erase the anguish in Maria's eyes, never forget when trust passed away, and never completely heal the wounds in his children's hearts. Some mistakes do not go away. This chapter could not be rewritten by any Hollywood redemption story, they relentlessly and silently live with you. Daily. He didn't appear in front of cameras to make a public appeal. Forgiveness. He also refrained from using talk show platforms to defend or misrepresent himself. The reality into something more palatable. Arnold Schwarzenegger made the decision to silence as a conscious act of responsibility rather than an escape, a choice to live with the consequences of his actions without wearing spectacles. When the truth came to light in 2011 and his family's foundation was destroyed, he moved away from the spotlight's glare. Not out of fear but in recognition that words alone cannot mend certain wounds. In an uncommon display of candor, he told a close confidant, "There is nobody else is at fault. I will live with the consequences of what I did." This was not a well-written press release or a headline-worthy line. It was the raw voice of a man who was exposed in confronting the truth of what he had lost. The woman who had shared decades of victories, Maria Shriver, and hardships alongside him, proceeded with dignity and quiet, making the decision tough route of healing instead of confrontation in public. However, their kids were granted the seclusion and safety required to deal with the suffering at their own pace after being shaken by the storm. Arnold was still there, but not in the opulent arenas where he had once flourished. But in the silent areas behind the scenes, where the laborious process of atonement really gets started. He didn't ever ignore Joseph, the son, whose presence had finally revealed the secret. Rather, Hester did constructing a relationship piece by piece, not out of duty but rather because acknowledgement, accountability, humanity, and the indisputable connection that had always existed in the boy's posture and eyes. They discovered common ground in the training discipline, in the language of perseverance and effort, and in the implicit knowledge that although neither could change how their story started, they could decide how the future chapters would be written. Arnold remained just as dedicated to his 4 Christopher, Patrick, Christina, Catherine, and other kids.
He didn't try to mend the rift with grand gestures or demand instant forgiveness. Rather, he decided to oppose subtly, regularly, and without the glitz of publicity. Birthdays, graduations, and informal family meals. Every moment is a silent affirmation of reality. That restoring trust takes a lifetime of dedication rather than a single action. He went back to work in the film industry. However, the desire for notoriety that he had softened once he was driven. He played fewer roles and made more measured appearances. His attention turned to causes that mirrored the kind of man he aspired to be. He supported efforts to combat climate change, stood in support for veterans, encouraged physical fitness, and made significant investments in education for young people. After-school programs were funded by him. Built outdoor fitness parks in underprivileged areas to promote healthy living, and made a substantial donation to Alzheimer's study and homage to Sergeant Shriver, Maria's father, whose memory he kept up. The cameras were not intended for these acts. And that was exactly what point. Regaining the adoration of the gods was never Arnold's idea of redemption. The general public. It was about continuing to be seen by those as a better man every day. The most hurt had been him. Sometimes, in the solitude of his house, he would pull out old pictures from before the fracture, when it was easier to smile and the air felt complete all around the family. He hardly ever talked when he was staring at them, but those who knew him well realized that his silence conveyed more sorrow and weight. More than any apology could ever offer. He once told a friend, "I created my life on self-control, but this was the one instance where I lapsed, and it cost me everything." He didn't get married again in the years that followed. Even so, his name would occasionally associated with friends. Arnold never again appeared in front of an altar to make promises. Some attributed it to a sense of loyalty to the past. Some thought it was his personal penance. Maybe in the back of his mind he acknowledged that he had let go of something extraordinary that he had once held. No sweeping was done. No media-crafted redemption arc at the end of this chapter. Just a man in his 70s keeping up his support for his kids, mentoring the next generation, and young people with scars that don't go away, from all walks of life gradually, but one that serves as a continual reminder of the knowledge gained hurting. That scar has served as Arnold Schwarzenegger's compass and his burden. A lasting, silent mark that taught him more about strength than any movie role, championship, or never could a political triumph. Arnold Schwarzenegger, 78, is no longer the unbreakable figure standing under the dazzling Olympia lights or crashing through fireballs on screen. However, the steel within his will endures, now tempered by scars, calmer mornings, and a more acute sense of time. The majority of days still start before sunrise inside his Mediterranean villa in Brentwood, Los Angeles, he bought for roughly $4.8 million in 2002. Currently, it is worth between $20 and $30 million on 6 verdant acres with a 14,500 T-shaped, square-foot arrangement for seclusion. Glass opening from floor to ceiling to the clear days, the Pacific and Catalina. The guest wing has 2 elevators. For weekends spent with family. There are 2 kitchens, a cozy, private one for everyday use and a modern, entertaining kitchen that opens to a pizza and barbecue area outside, a private theater, a game and pool lounge, a wine cellar with a soda bar, a rare flat lawn, a resort-style pool with terraces, cabanas, and an outdoor kitchen featuring a stone oven and smoker. Within his hangar and garage, the artifacts speak louder than any role in life. A genuine M47 patent tank made by his military service in Austria. The Hummer H1AM General that started a civilian madness. An H1 with an electric conversion that pays homage to the future. A BMW i7 xDrive 60 and a contemporary Hummer EV. A Chevrolet Suburban for discreet family needs. A Phaeton from the Excalibur Series 2, a Porsche 911 Turbo Cabriolet for sunset glides, for extravagant nostalgia, and according to certain profiles, a Bugatti Veyron Grand Sport with a custom electric G-Class was created in collaboration with an e-mobility partner in Europe. When company or he boards his Gulfstream 3750 after his family calls him far away. Range in nautical miles. Usually 12 luxurious seats, with fewer as a status symbol. Rather than as a means of reclaiming his minutes following decades of pursuit. However, the valuable engine in his chest is the one he tends to every morning. The Cadence ESA 2024 pacemaker has kept him steady, but every beat bears the memory of the replacement of the aortic valve in 1997, the urgent open heart surgery in 2018 to 2020's third operation. He acknowledges that on some mornings after surgery,
opening his eyes felt similar to winning a lottery for which he had not purchased a ticket. The man now measures instead of measuring himself in plates and reps. The self-control to quit before the pain begins. Training is accurate, not punishing. Plant-based meals high in heart-healthy nutrients have replaced protein shakes. Greens and healthy fats. Every day, he meditates and watches quick fitness videos that he demonstrates that self-control can triumph over ego in men his age, even when tendons give way to muscles, and muscles give way to time. He didn't get married again after his 2011 parted ways with Maria Shriver, whom he still respected as the mother of his 4 children. To learn more, physical therapist Heather Milligan has been his partner for more than 10 years. Their life together is calm, steady, and devoid of extravagant appearances. His youngsters can stand firmly by themselves. Catherine stops by with her small children. Allowing him to be a father in a more gentle way. Patrick strikes a balance between acting and business ownership. Christina makes a name for herself outside of the spotlight. Joseph, the son who used to live in the shadows, and Christopher both lead stable, grounded lives. Is now completely a part of the family. Their ironclad bond, lengthy conversations, and Thea's shared commitment to move forward without changing the past. Regarding the funds, Forbes 2025 estimates his net worth to be around $1.2 million, despite the myth $1 the outcome of the same index card goals he wrote that day, not by accident. In 1968, he arrived in America. Franco owned the bricklaying business Columbia that prospered following the San Fernando earthquake in 1971. An early mail orderer, fitness endeavors. At the age of 25, the first apartment complex that opened the actual estate floodgates. The Lessons of Planet Hollywood. Oak Productions. Publish Endeavors. The Arnold Sports Festival began in 1989 and was co-founded in 2018. LeBron James endorsed the latter supplement brand prior to its sale in 2012, but he now chooses acting roles for their purpose rather than their pay. He invests money and time into after-school activities, public fitness parks, veteran assistance, and environmental Alzheimer's research and advocacy in Sergeant Shriver's honor, whose Arnold's compass is still shaped by decline. The public doesn't want it, but those close he claims that his affairs are carefully planned out. An additional method of attending family. His face has wrinkles from age. Reduced his pace, but the handshake is firm. The same spark that once drove him was still shining in his eyes. Across an ocean, a young Austrian with only a dream. Strength, he's learned that standing steadily is more important than hitting hard. At graduation ceremonies, on the sidelines of games, at on-camera dinner tables, on morning rides in Brentwood, where every turn seems like a fulfillment of a promise. If the machines are his battalions, the mansion is his fortress, and the lesson follows. This is from his late 70s. Legacy is not resisted, redemption is not blaring, and every small step forward matters. Particularly when the clock inside your chest serves as a reminder of why you take it. Arnold Schwarzenegger's final A story is more than just medals, movies, or muscles. This is the journey of a Thalboy once dreamed of, a life while gazing past the Austrian mountains. Much bigger than the slender one that was in front of him. Getting from freezing gyms and halting English to his grandchildren's laughter fills the kitchen with the gentle light of a Los Angeles morning. It's the hard-won knowledge acquired via successes, setbacks, and wounds and invisible. The most powerful muscle that a person can develop is the one that continues to appear. We honor him not because he never made mistakes, but rather because he made the decision to change. He substituted the steady hum of a crowd for the roar of the crowd. Bicycle wheel in the morning. The silent weight of an iron plate clattering the hand of a child. He is an example of how reinvention does not equate to surrender. It is survival, and occasionally the most courageous thing a person can do. I'm almost 80 now, Arnold reminds us with a heart that has been repeatedly opened and repaired. That trophies and headlines don't adequately convey the real triumphs in life. They are discovered when nobody cheers. In the pardon given, in the self-control maintained when no one is looking, in the decision to continue moving when being motionless would be simpler. Let his journey speak to you. If it does, stay put. Talk about the aspect of his life that you remember. Not only because it honors him, but because that spark might be needed by someone else. Power isn't measured not by the force of your blows but by the depth of your concern, how you are able to persevere. Unlike Arnold, we are not born legends, but we can develop ourselves day by day, one decision at a time.